Um, so glad to get this going live. Had some few issues with some software, things like that. So we are going to have to live stream League 1 first ever college game day video. I hope this works. I hope everything works out all right. Um, if you guys are watching and anything starts not working and getting funky, go ahead and let me know. But welcome to the first ever League 1 college game day. A lot of work and time and effort has been put into this, so I really hope you guys enjoy. Um, just yeah, really hope you enjoy. Again, if anything starts going wrong, going funky, just go ahead, send me a message on here, or you guys in the league, go ahead and send me a text because I'll have to go full screen on certain things. So I won't be able to see the Twitch. Actually, I can pull it up my phone probably. So either way, send me a text or send a message on here, and if something's going wrong, to let me know. But without further ado, here is the first ever League 1 college game day.
Spanning the nation from California, Oklahoma, Iowa, Ohio, North Carolina, Virginia, and Florida. This is League 1 NCAA football. This is League 1 NCAA football. Scenes there of the beautiful campus and stadium of Notre Dame University here in South Bend, Indiana. We're coming to you just off campus, a couple of blocks away, right near the Linebacker Restaurant, a popular eatery here in South Bend. Also, just just a few blocks away from the College Football Hall of Fame. A lot of Hall of Fame action happening this season in League One. It's season 15 of League One action. We've got all 10 coaches, all 10 games on tap for you in store this week. We hope you'll enjoy the review.
As you can see there, we had a lot of great games already played this week. Some decided in overtime, some in the fourth quarter, and some of them decided in the first quarter. And we have plenty of games in store for the back half of this week. Some really good matchups there. Can't wait to see those games unfold, especially the two games tomorrow.
Yeah, a lot of exciting action out there this week, Coach. Both in the games that have been decided and the games yet to come. One thing that's been decided last week in week 9 of League One, there were some players that we want to take a look at. Players of the week, players who had a particularly dominating performance.
Yeah, we had a player on each shot of the ball on offense and defense that just were above everybody else on their performance last week. We're going to go ahead and start it off on the defensive side of the ball. Sophomore left end Jacob McKnight out of Central Michigan had a dominating performance against rival Eastern Michigan in their 48 to 28 win. He had 7 tackles. All 7 of those were for loss, and 6 of those were sacks. Not only did he have all that, he also forced a fumble.
Yeah, really a dominant performance there by McKnight. He's an exciting 83 sophomore playing left end for the Chippewas. He was the left end, the starting left end last year as a freshman. Recorded 19 sacks on the season. He's already up to 14 this season, and we're barely halfway through.
Yes, and on the offensive side of the ball, we had to give it to junior quarterback Tommy Tenuvasa out of Syracuse. In his win over the Florida State Seminoles, he went a perfect 23 for 23 for 271 yards. And imagine this, had 23 carries as well. Had 177 rushing yards, combining for 448 total yards, 7 total touchdowns, and I believe this man is the front runner in the Heisman race. Can you give some more about that, Coach?
That's right, Tommy Tenavasa leading the Heisman race. You see here on your screen. He's number 1 right now. He's got there's the yardage and the stats from last game, the 448 yards of offense. He's in first place right now for the Heisman in his junior year. Right behind him, Jonathan Ward, senior halfback for the Chippewas of Central Michigan. Last week, he had 26 carries for 177 yards and 4 touchdowns. Also caught an 18-yard reception for a touchdown. He's had a fantastic season so far. He's got 161 yards rushing per game on the ground. That's just a little bit behind Tenavasa on the ground. You see Tenavasa with 1562 on the season on the ground. with 21-16 in the air. Third place, Salvin Ahmed for Washington, the halfback for the Huskies, coming in last week with 94 yards and a touchdown on the season, ripping off 156 yards per game. He's got 1,200 yards rushing. Fourth place, Kevin Marks. Kevin for the Buffalo Bulls, the senior 78 halfback, the lowest rated player by far on the Heisman watch list, coming in fourth, overperforming for the 13th ranked Bulls. He had 24 carries for 162 yards and 2 touchdowns in their win over the Red Hawks last week in MAC play. He's been a dominant part of the Buffalo offense and a reason why they've ascended up the polls. Fifth place, the only CPU player, Lamar Thompson. He's a 4-year starter for the undefeated top 5 New Mexico Lobos. A big reason why they've succeeded this year. You see his numbers down a little bit from last season, but he'll gladly take the wins over the stats. Passing wise, a decent enough ratio, not too much for the run heavy Lobos. He's certainly a part of the offense on the ground, getting almost 100 yards a game from the quarterback position. So that's a look at our top 5 Heisman candidates. What do you think, Coach?
I think that either 5 of these players would be very deserving of this award. They all are big contributors to their teams. They're all excellent players. They all show great class. They're just good. I mean, these guys come out week in and week out and just perform at a high level, and they definitely have been separating themselves from the rest of the pack. I cannot wait to see who wins this prestigious award. Now, with that being said, individuals do well, but we also need to know how well these teams are doing. And we're going to go ahead and start off by heading off to the East Coast to see how the Buffalo Bulls are doing so far this season. How are they doing so far, Coach?
Yeah, the Buffalo Bulls, as we said, Marks leading the way, Kevin Marks. They started off the season, just to recap, because we have missed the first half of the season, beating Fresno State and Indiana in close user games. Then a Western team with Arizona State paying a visit to Buffalo. And then in MAC conference play, they've ripped off 5 straight conference wins, or rather 4 straight. And then this week, on the road at Oklahoma State, we saw earlier when the card was put up, that was one of our triple overtime games this week. We'll talk about that more later, but it was an exciting affair between Buffalo and Oklahoma State. Big game coming up next week. You see it there, the user matchup with number 14 Central Michigan. We'll talk about them more here in just a little bit.
And these Bulls have been playing well all season long. Definitely deserving of their 8-0 record. Good football team coached by Coach Hannon. He's got these guys rolling, and they look to be doing big things this season with the second-year coach there in Buffalo. And we're going to go ahead now and switch gears and come over to the West Coast and talk about the Hawaii Warriors. These guys have just been up and down. Early start, they went 1-2 with their then head coach, losing to Michigan 10-35, went over in FCS East 33-10, and losing to Illinois 20-31. They then let go of their coach and hired brand new coach Kyle Carter, and he comes in here hot, starting off 2-0, beating Boise State 38-28, and then beat Utah State 52-27. And then after that, it's just been disappointment for the Warriors, having lost to UNLV 48-56, then getting just dominated by the New Mexico Lobos 17-62, and then losing to Colorado State 50-70. Those last 3 games, the defense averaged giving up 62 points per game. Not what you want to see as a head coach, but they don't need to despair. There's still plenty of time to turn the season around and get back to winning as they face Nevada at home, who's 1-6. Then they have San Jose State, who's also 1-6. Then they finish off on the road their last two games of the season against 3-5 San Diego State, and then that big time rivalry game against Fresno State on the.
Yeah, looking at the Hawaii schedule there, they started off with the introduction of Coach Carter coming in there against Boise State. They did, like as you just said, Coach. They started off hot. I think in recent weeks they've kind of hit the buzzsaw with a little bit of health concerns from the quarterback position. They can't seem to stay on the field, and obviously that hurts the offense, but it also hurts the defense. The style of play that Hawaii likes to play. Coach Carter is a really offensive-minded coach and likes the wham bam, high-scoring offense. And of course, the more times you score, the more times your defense is on the field. And if your defense isn't that good, you don't want to be getting into shootouts. So the fact that the Warriors recently have been getting into shootouts, maybe kind of playing against them, and I suspect that Coach Carter is going to take a hard look and investigate his team, see if he can't get this thing turned around before it's too late, because Hawaii can still make a bowl.
Absolutely, Coach. You're absolutely correct there.
That takes us into East Carolina. East Carolina, coached by Coach Brack, they started off the season at number one Syracuse, played close, lost by 14, and then played Boise State, who we just mentioned there, playing out west in the Mountain West Conference. They played them in a very tightly run affair, won 45-41, and then traveled for a user game against number 11 Washington. That game was actually about 45-21 before Washington left its starters in and ran up the score at the end of the game. TCU at home was a close run affair at 21-17. Memphis in overtime, single overtime, 41-38. SMU proving difficult in the American. They, of course, finished in the rankings number 2 in the final top 25 polls last year, and they bested East Carolina this year, 49-26. But last week against USF, East Carolina emerged triumphant, 31-14, rallying to their 4-3 record. They're 2-1 in the conference going into their game against UConn this week. UConn at 0-7 might seem unthreatening, but remember, fans, it was an 0-7 UConn team that beat East Carolina last year. So as the Pirates go into their back half of their schedule, looking at UConn, Temple, Navy, Marshall, Cincinnati, those are all, with the exception of Navy, Eastern Division teams. Going to go a long way to deciding that Eastern Division in the American. I can tell you this, that USF and Cincinnati are the only two teams with one loss in conference play. And with USF having suffered that against East Carolina last week, it might be that Cincinnati is the main roadblock in the Eastern Division.
I do agree, Coach. It could be Cincinnati be the team to take them on, maybe cause them to not get there. But I think this Pirates team is looking really good. I think Coach has them playing at a high level, and I think they'll take care of business, and they will see their way into an American Conference Championship game. But the only team that may give them some issues is Navy. That should be a tough game for them, but I do believe that they should take care of business elsewise and be on their way to American Conference Championship. And speaking of teams playing pretty good right now, the Washington Huskies 7-1, playing really good under new head coach Barker. He has this team playing at a very high level with just the one loss this year so far, and that was in the Barker Bowl against Appalachian State, where they lost 21-24. Appalachian State played one hell of a game, and the coach had a game plan that worked, and it's the only loss that the Huskies have received so far this season. They do have a win to start the season over Indiana 20-13 in the user matchup there. Then they went off to play USC, sorry, winning that 24-17. Then a dominant performance over ECU 66-21. Um, then to beat UCLA 42-21. Then that loss in the Barker Bowl, the Battle of the Brothers. And then three straight wins, all in Pac-12 play. 29-21 over then ranked number one Stanford. 38-27 over Colorado, and 27-8 over the Cal Golden Bears. And the back half of their season doesn't look too difficult. They have one game on tap that might be challenging. Um, they are home against Arizona State, who is 3-4 currently. Then they go on the road against Oregon State, who is 2-5. Then home against number 10 Oregon, who is currently 6-1. So that might be a tough test for them. And of course, can't ever write off Washington State. That is a big time rivalry between the Huskies and the Cougars. So
Yeah, looking forward to that Apple Cup as always, Coach. Washington State. Washington having gotten it done on defense this year. A lot of low numbers there in the scoring column on the schedule, uh, led by Onwuzurike, that star defensive end. He's been a menace there on that side of the ball. And of course, the Heisman candidate Ahmed getting it done on the offensive side of the ball. Two superstars leading the defense and the offense, respectively, for the Huskies. Navy, more of a team game. We're going to take a look here at the Navy midshipmen. Here's their schedule. They started with number 15, Texas Tech, on the road. Texas Tech only having one loss recently, and that was a close run affair, losing by 7. Talk about a close run affair. They then played in a user game against Coach Barker for App State, and that was a 4 overtime marathon, with the App State Mountaineers emerging victorious by 3. Opening conference play at Marshall and then Temple at home saw them rip off a couple of wins before a close run affair again, coming back from a 20-6 halftime deficit on the road at the formerly ranked Memphis Tigers. The Tigers down a little bit from last year when they finished in the top 10. Still have quite a number of players on offense and defense that are playmakers. Number 21 SMU in the rivalry game, that old menace, a heartbreaking affair there as Navy falls 31-27 in a game where they had the ball in the closing moments of the game with the lead and just weren't quite able to hang on to it. SMU with a huge pick 6, and Navy unable to get it done when they got the ball back with just seconds to spare, falls in that heartbreaker, but then rebounds the next week with a game against Tulsa on the road in an important Western Division game in the American Western Division. This week, the game of the week, Navy Notre Dame, which we'll talk about much more further. You can take a look at the stats here for Navy. They're coming in with the number 4 rush defense in the country, and they're in a positive on the turnover differential. And of course, they're led by Malcolm Perry. We'll talk more about him too. But first, Coach, what do you think about the midshipmen?
oh, these midshipmen are playing really good football right now, and if they had one or two plays go a different direction, I mean, you could be talking about an undefeated team at this point. But they didn't get those plays, and they are where they are. But it doesn't matter. These guys are playing good football right now, and I think Coach Ninja has this program going in the right direction. Has them very well disciplined, play really good clock management. This is a good football team, despite what their record says. These guys are good. They can line up against almost anybody, and I think be very competitive with whoever they're lined up against. just a few disappointing losses. I'm pretty sure they wish would gone the other way. And to roll off of that, I know another team that is probably feeling the same way, and that'd be the Indiana Hoosiers. They've lost their first two games were one score games, losing to Washington 13 to 20, and then losing to Buffalo 21 to 24. Both of those user matchups really close there. But then it starts to get not so close as they opened up their Big Ten play against Northwestern and lost in a big loss, 17 to 63, and they followed up with a 21 to 42 loss against Central Michigan in a user matchup. But after that, the Hoosiers started turning things around, beating Illinois 45 to 41, then knocking off Purdue 49-27, and then a big time win over rival Michigan State 28 to 25. So some promising victories there at the end, especially that Michigan State game, and they're going to need it as they are facing off the Rutgers this week on the road, who is 4-3. Then they have Maryland at home, who is 2-6, and then when the gauntlet starts, the games that have been giving the Hoosiers the most trouble for their past few years. They're home against Michigan, who is currently 5-3. Then their last home game against number 8 Ohio State, who is 6-1, and then they go on the road to face number 24 Penn State, who is 4-3. So those are going to be some tough games there in the back half of the schedule. What do you think, Coach?
Well, looking at Indiana, obviously they've had a good record the last couple of seasons against Michigan State. They were able to pull that out again this year with a team that came into that game with the number one ranked defense in the country in the Spartans. And Indiana was able to overcome that. So if they can overcome the number one defense with Michigan State, they're going to have a chance against just about anybody. You see they're rallying in their schedule. They did the same thing last year, started a little bit slow, and then rallied as the year wore on. Right now, they're still very much in play in that Big Ten East. Obviously, they have the gauntlet late, but if they can survive enough of that, they might get themselves a share of the division, and that might be enough to get them in Indianapolis for the Big Ten Conference Championship, possibly a rematch with Northwestern. You know that they'd like to take another bite at them
Oh yeah, they would.
after that big blowout in the beginning of the season. One team that started the season with a blowout on the positive side would be App State. The Mountaineers opening with four straight road games, and that Georgia Southern team just fresh up from Division One AA, officially called the FCS. Uh, App State blew them out of the water, 80-17. Followed that up with a close game against Coastal Carolina. That was a game where they went into the fourth quarter with a big lead, only to see Coastal rally and make that game look a little bit closer than it could have been or should have been. Although with Coastal's record of 6-2, perhaps that comeback looks a little bit better now than it did at the time. Week 3, they played Navy and had a comeback of their own, entering the fourth quarter trailing 21-7 before rallying to win that game in 4 overtimes, 56-53, a marathon affair that was one of our games of the season. They followed that up with a trip up to the Carrier Dome to take on number 1 Syracuse. They weren't number 1 at the time, but they were certainly top 10, and unable to get it done, falling by 20 some points. They threw a few interceptions, turned the ball over a few times, and we'll see. That's kind of been an ongoing problem. But they had no problems in week 6. An exciting affair in the Barker Bowl, taking on the Washington Huskies, dealing the Huskies their only loss of the season, 24-21, in a game where App State milked the clock, played ball control, played possession, took control of the game early, and hung on for dear life at the end, able to get enough first downs to finish out the clock and get the key home win in that brotherly rivalry. A couple of weeks off might have caused them some harm because then they went into Texas State for their first road game in a few weeks, their second game in a month, playing at the Bobcats of Texas State. They got ambushed, turned the ball over 8 times in that game. You can't turn the ball over 8 times and have a prayer to win against anybody, even if they are 0-5. This week they're taking on Louisiana. We showed that score earlier. They came out with the win, but they came into the game with the bottom ranked turnover differential in the country. That -8 from the Texas State game, a big player in that. They do have the 16th ranked passing offense when they're not turning the ball over, and the 6th ranked scoring offense. So this is a team at 4-2, now 5-2, including the win over Louisiana. 5-2 going into the back part of their schedule, all home games. They have a 5-game homestand to finish the season this year after closing with 5 road games last year. Coach Barker is going to look to rally the Mountaineers and hopefully finish 9-2, maybe creep back into the top 25, which they were flirting with earlier before their big upset loss to the Bobcats. The Sun Belt Conference, up and down. You see a couple of teams on there, Coach, and possibly Troy and Louisiana Monroe could offer the biggest challenge. Maybe Arkansas State. I don't know how much you know about the Sun Belt, but I do know that any given Saturday, any team can win.
Yeah, you're absolutely right, Coach. Any given Saturday, any team facing one another can win. So these Ohio State Mountaineers really need to keep playing good ball because we've seen what happens when you don't come and play your best game. That was a disappointing loss for them. They should have gotten, or they should have taken care of business there, and they failed to. I mean, 8 turnovers is just, uh, it's a killer as a coach. You hate seeing that, but just shows that you can't come in and just show up. You mean you got to come ready to play. The Mountaineers weren't ready to play there, and so very disappointing for them. But I do think that the Mountaineers should take care of business, win out the rest of those games. I don't think those games should give them any issues. I think Coach Barker is going to get his team turnaround, fix the mistakes that they had, and win out and win the Sun Belt Conference. And speaking of teams that have good chances of winning their conference, Central Michigan, the Chippewas, 8-0, probably one of their best starts to any of their seasons in school history. This team is red hot, and their offense is just electrifying. I mean, they have been putting up points like it's nothing. The only team to really kind of slow them down, if you want to call it slowing down, was Fresno State, holding them to 31 points. And that's also the closest game they've had all season, with an 11-point victory there, where they did kick a field goal late to go up 11. So, really, the only close game they've had all season, because they started off the season against North Carolina winning 42-21. Then they go and play home against North Texas, win that one 63-32. Then on the road against a user in Indiana and beat them 42-21. Then, like we mentioned, that Fresno State game there, 31-20. Then they start getting into their MAC play and they beat the Red Hawks 63-42. Then the pair of rivalry games in Western Michigan and Eastern Michigan, winning that 49-35, then 48-28, and this week they beat Kent State 63-35. This offense just pretty much can't be stopped by almost anybody. But we'll see what happens next week when they have the big marquee matchup against the Buffalo Bulls, who are currently sitting at number 13 at 8-0. That one should be tough. Cannot wait to see that one game. They follow that one with a road game against Ball State, who is 5-2, and then they finish the last 2 games at home versus Toledo, who is 1-6, and Northern Illinois, who is 4-4. lots of exciting football still left for the Chippewas. Really think the next two games are the last two games that can test them, and I think they should uh, do well and make it to the MAC championship game where I think they'll have a rematch against Buffalo. And the winner of that game, should they win both games, I think could possibly see them way to a national title game. Who knows? It could happen. The right teams lose, and if the team that wins that game and wins again, it'd be hard to keep them out. But we will have to see what happens.
Yeah, looking at that back end of the MAC schedule, outside of that user game against Buffalo, I expect that Central Michigan, if they put their hard hat on, if they stay zen, that they ought to be able to get those wins that they need in order to wind up in Detroit at Ford Field for the MAC championship game. You mentioned that they only had the one game at the beginning of the season that was close. I expect that the Buffalo game could very well be close. At least the game one, I should say,
Oh yeah, I agree.
between the two of them. And I think both teams, led by a couple of Heisman candidates on both sidelines, that should be an exciting affair. I'm definitely looking forward to that one in next week's action. But there's another team that's really only had one close game this season, and that's the Syracuse Orange, ranked number one in the country right now. Opened the year against East Carolina. Coach Brack put up a heck of a fight, and it was really a red zone interception and an interception in the end zone. A couple of red zone mistakes by East Carolina, and in addition to them being unable to slow down the Syracuse offense, that resulted in a 42-28 victory. Following that, a trip up to the new Meadowlands Stadium, MetLife Stadium in New York, and a neutral site game against the Notre Dame Fighting Irish. That was a game that finished 45-27 as the Syracuse offense was able to outlast Notre Dame in an offensive affair. After that was a game against Fresno State. That game, over the span of six quarters, with a thunder and lightning delay in the middle of the game, causing the game to be replayed from the beginning after almost an entire half had been played. But despite Fresno jumping out to an early lead in the second stanza, the second game, Syracuse still able to come back, rally, and win a game 49-32 that saw the Bulldogs get a couple of touchdowns at the very end that made that score a little bit more appetizing than it could have been otherwise. The third user matchup in the game against App State, that was a game where App State turned the ball over 4 or 5 times with interceptions, and that was enough to get it done for Syracuse. Just had too many more possessions than the Mountaineers did. And then into conference play in the ACC, on the road to the Bandbox in Atlanta against the option-oriented Georgia Tech Yellow Jackets. Syracuse shut down the rushing attack, 63-17, the final in that one. And then Duke, who made the ACC championship game last year, suffering a little bit this year at 2-5, still quarterbacked by Daniel Jones, sixth overall pick in last year's draft by the New York Football Giants, fell this time 83-10 before the bye week. Coming out of the bye, Louisville was a game that was a 3-point affair last year. That was one that the Orange won 41-38. This year, not so much, as Syracuse raced out to an early lead and really never looked back. It wasn't until the second half that Louisville was able to get their offense rolling, and by then it was too little too late. Last week's action saw them take on Florida State at Doak Campbell Stadium in Tallahassee, and it saw the Orange rip off a 63-21 win. Uh, Coming into this week's game hasn't been played yet. That'll be tomorrow night at 8 on Twitch. That's going to be against Clemson, who's 4-3 coming into the game. You see some of the numbers there for the season so far. Looking back at a season review like we've been doing, if you're looking at Syracuse, the number one scoring offense, the number two total offense, number three rushing offense, number 25 passing offense, still quite respectable through the air despite that dominant rushing attack. Really just an offensive juggernaut, and no slouch on defense, holding the number one rush defense in the country and the 16th overall defense as well on that side of the ball. Plus the 11th ranked turnover differential at +8 on the year, and it's hard to find chinks in the armor. You can say, well, the pass defense is 119th, but when you're leading games, teams that are playing against you tend to throw the ball exclusively, and that's gonna push up that passing yardage. It'll, to be fair, it'll also push down the rushing yardage as well. But I don't. I'm not necessarily sure that I would say that Syracuse's pass defense, while a weakness in the past, is necessarily uh, the chink in Smog's armor, the perfect spot where you can strike against the orange. Looking at the back end of that schedule, Boston College, Wake Forest, NC State coming up after this week. Boston College is technically a rivalry game. Hasn't resulted in that the last couple of years. They've been blowout affairs. And really, with the exception of an upset at NC State 3 years ago, none of these teams has posed too much of a challenge for Syracuse. It could be that this Clemson game is the last hurdle for the Orange. We'll see. Knock on wood. Whether or not the prediction holds true, but it's looking like it's shaping up like Syracuse, if they can get by Clemson, might be on their way, as long as they cross their T's and dot their I's, to another ACC championship berth down in Charlotte, North Carolina, to take on the winner of the West, which could be a top 10, maybe a top 5 team. There's a couple of undefeateds going into this weekend. Number 6, Virginia lost, but Miami is sitting there right at number 3, also undefeated. And the winner of that game will go a long way to decide the Western Division. If you'll remember, Miami is the team who defeated Syracuse, ended their dreams of their first national championship in decades 2 seasons ago, where they upset the Syracuse Orange in the ACC championship game, ending an undefeated season and crushing the dreams of the Orange 2 years ago. Last year, as I said earlier, the ACC championship against Duke, Syracuse was able to emerge victorious on their way to that first national championship since 1959. And if the Syracuse Orange hope to repeat, it could be that they'll have to get through the Hurricanes one more time.
And that could be the only game that I think could test these Orange because, in all honesty, I don't think anybody in the ACC even comes close comparing to as good as the Syracuse Orange is. Um, the Orange have just been flat out dominating everybody they've played. No one's really even come close. I mean, you can call that week 1 game kind of close there, but that could just because of a new season, a couple new players testing things out. But since then, the Orange have been firing and firing on all cylinders. These guys, I like to say, they're the new Alabama. If you read my mid-season uh, article about the review of all the teams, I definitely think the torch has now passed from the Alabama Crimson Tide to the Syracuse Orange. It's Syracuse and then everybody else. These guys are just flat out, just outplaying every other team. No one even comes close. I really think the ACC championship game is going to be the first time that we might possibly see a test. It might not even be until the national title game. So we'll see. Plenty of season left there for the Orange to play. But speaking of teams red hot right now, the Fresno State Bulldogs coming off three straight victories, um, and against good opponents. They didn't start the season off how they would like to, but they played arguably one of the toughest beginning schedules of any users. Because if you look at their losses, they lost to undefeated Buffalo, 24-27. They lost to undefeated Syracuse, 32-49. They lost to undefeated Air Force, 29-35, who Air Force actually did just lose to Army this week, so they are actually no longer undefeated, but so they are now 7-1. They lose to number 4 New Mexico, 49-52. They lose to Central Michigan undefeated, 20-31. All of those teams besides Air Force are still currently undefeated. These this schedule was brutal, and they were in all of the games but one. So if a few different plays go their way, Fresno State could be 7-1 right now, but they're not. They're 3-5, and those three wins have been the last 3 weeks where they beat Colorado State 55-43, then a big time win on the road against Boise State 49-42, and then they beat the UNL Running Rebels 34, or sorry, UNLV left the V out there. The UNLV Running Rebels 34-28 to give themselves the sole lead of the West in the Mountain West at a 3-2 conference record. And the Bulldogs, they control their own destiny. If they can win their last 4 games, they can win the West and head off to the Mountain West Conference Championship. And that is going to have to be done by playing San Jose State on the road, who's currently 1-6. Then they have a home game against San Diego State, who is 3-5. Then back on the road against Nevada, who's 1-6, and then they finish off the regular season at home against rival Hawaii, which will be a big time marquee user versus user matchup game.
Yeah, that Western Division is shaping up to be a tight race, as you mentioned. And Fresno State leads it at 3-2, but there's two teams right on their heels at 2-3 that might have something to say about that. In addition to more teams jumbled up behind them. It's going to be an exciting closing part of the year for them. It's a challenging game against San Diego State, despite their record. And then, of course, the user matchup against Hawaii. Those two coaches have a long history against each other. They know each other well. I expect that'll be a thrilling game to watch. One of our more exciting user games of the season. And really, Fresno State, as you mentioned, rallying from the 0-5 start with that brutal beginning of the season. I'm looking at the team and thinking, this is a team like you mentioned that a couple of plays, a couple of calls here and there, them and Navy both in that boat, and really Buffalo the beneficiary of the other side of that possibility. Buffalo's had a few close games; they've won all of them, and you look at where they are now, getting ready to go into next week, potentially being as high as the top 10. So this is a very underrated, underranked Fresno State Bulldogs team. I expect that they'll continue their run, they'll continue their rally, and have something to say as to who goes to that conference championship game. Now that's going to be very likely a rematch against the top 5 Lobos. Very difficult team to play there. The jury's still out as to whether or not either Hawaii or Fresno State can beat them. But as far as the Western Division goes, the Bulldogs control their own destiny. That destiny, a team affair, them, and while team is the way that Navy preaches, as far as the way that they operate under Coach Ninja. Navy led so far this year. This guy's he's not in the Heisman race, but he is an absolutely demonic player,
Oh yeah,
and
he
that's
is.
Malcolm Perry.
Absolutely.
Malcolm Perry for Navy. He's a gamer, and you're looking at his numbers here on the screen. He's a 98 overall with 96 speed, 99 awareness, 96 break tackle. Yeah, he's 5'9" and he's under 200 pounds, but he's elusive with that 93 and 93 vision. He's a smart player. He's a really smart player. He's got good enough stamina. He's got really high injury. That's allowed him to be a focal point of the offense for a couple of years now. He was their starting tailback last year, ripped off 800 yards. Now, Navy, not a stats team. They play small ball. They play clock management. They limit their opponent's possessions. A very methodical, intentional style of play. So you're not going to see numbers necessarily that jump off the page aside from last season's 21 rushing touchdowns. Uh, he's only getting 53.6 yards a game, uh, but that again is not indicative of his skill set. He's used certainly in the red zone with the 8 rushing touchdowns, and definitely in the passing game. Probably one of, if not the leading receivers for Navy. I believe he's in the top two in receptions, and he's ripping off actually more yards through the air than he is on the ground. 58 yards a game through the air with 3 touchdowns. You see last year averaging 44, almost 49 yards a game. This year up 10 yards. That's a significant increase given Navy's offense in his participation in the passing game. So he's become a more well-rounded player. He's an absolute beast on the field. He is a player that Navy is going to need if they're going to win in this game of the week this week against Notre Dame. Uh, this is a guy who is he's a player that any team would want in their foxhole, but certainly a guy that they're going to look to in the fourth quarter as well as the first and throughout the game as the engine of their offense. Very crucial player for Navy in this week's matchup.
He is a big time player for this week in their matchup against Notre Dame. These guys, he's just electric as they come. Um, he, you know, I think he doesn't get enough credit as he deserves because of his numbers. Um, but due to the way Navy runs the ball or the way their offense works, just like you mentioned, it's a lot about clock management. They're not really a stat team, so I think that hurts him for the average fan. But if you really watch and you see what he does, this kid is phenomenal. I mean, he could be easily in the Heisman race if he had the stat line to back him up. But unfortunately, he does not have it, and it's all right. I think this guy would definitely be in the running for the Heisman. He is as electric as they come. But really looking forward to that matchup between Navy and Notre Dame. A huge game coming there. Cannot wait for that one to kick off tomorrow night.
It's looking like it's going to be a good day for the game. We've had good weather all week here in South Bend.
Oh yeah.
Great hospitality, of course, but certainly good weather this week. It's been bright and sunny, clear skies. We're hoping for the same on game day when they get
I mean, he could be easily in the Heisman race if he had the stat line to back him up. But unfortunately, he does not have it, and you know, it's all right. I think this guy would definitely be in the running for the Heisman. He is as electric as they come. But really looking forward to that matchup between Navy and Notre Dame. Huge game coming there. Cannot wait for that one to kick off tomorrow night.
It's looking like it's going to be a good day for the game. We've had good weather all week here in South Bend.
Oh yeah.
Great hospitality, of course, but uh, certainly good weather this week. It's been bright and sunny, clear skies. We're hoping for the same on game day when they get.
Yeah, absolutely. It would be nice if that could be if the weather stays as great as it's been. It's been amazing here in South Bend. Just absolutely amazing.
It's a hard game to pick, though.
Yeah,
You know,
that is.
it's 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 a hard when you're we actually we had a survey that we sent out to the coaches around League 1 this week, and we had them fill out their picks for this week's games, and you're seeing those now up on the screen. This week's games, this week's picks, and Navy Notre Dame. One that a lot of people had a hard time picking Navy to pull off. I don't know if you call it an upset. It certainly is an upset in terms of the way the teams are rated. But anytime Coach Ninja beats somebody, I'm kind of reticent to call it an upset. He's capable of beating anybody at any time, and I think they're certainly capable of winning this game in South Bend. But a lot of games this week difficult to pick. Some of them not so hard to pick, as you see there. A couple of unanimous and near unanimous selections on the screen there. But there were a couple in particular that were really hard to pick. Is there one that sticks out for you, Coach?
Yeah, the Oklahoma State Buffalo game was a really tough one for me. I could have gone either way with that game. I had to really think about it. I decided to go with Buffalo. I think Chase Hannon has really gotten things done there. I really believe in what he's done with his program, and I think he's got this team going in the right direction. And the Oklahoma State Cowboys are a really good football team. So it was really really tough one. I had to spend quite a few minutes really thinking about it, but ultimately I had to go with the Buffalo Bulls on that one. I think Coach Hannon is taking these guys in the right direction, like I said, and I think he's going to get things done. And he proved me right. They had to win it in triple overtime, but they got it done. And as hard as it was to pick, it definitely showed on the field. A super exciting game, and both teams played it hard. They played real hard.
Yeah, I think the game that I had the most difficulty picking might have been Fresno State and UNLV. The Bulldogs coming off back-to-back wins, entering the game, and of course, being aware of their first 5 games and who those teams were. You kind of ignore the record a little bit of 2-5. But UNLV, you can't ignore the 5-2 there. And you can't ignore that the Running Rebels knocked off one of our other users, Coach Carter, out of Hawaii. Fairly handily. Although the game was decided, if you will, on the 1 yard line late, um, they were able to get the goal line stand, but then ripped off a 99-yard drive for the touchdown. So the UNLV offense came into the game with the fifth ranked yardage wise offense and the seventh ranked offense in points per game. So it wasn't so much that I was necessarily doubting Fresno State and their momentum as much as I was really impressed by the performance of the Running Rebels so far. Certainly on the offensive side of the ball, they got a lot of good players. They're very senior heavy, which bodes poorly for them next season. But it's a good thing to have this season because you got a lot of high awareness players, a lot of smart decision makers out there on the field for UNLV. So I kind of went back and forth in this game, and I believe I ended up, just to let you know, picking Fresno State. But it was a game that I definitely hemmed and hawed over for quite some time.
Yeah, it definitely was a tough one. Of course, I could not make a pick being the coach of the Fresno State Bulldogs, but yeah, that would have been a tough one to pick too. But we definitely have a tough one here with our game of the week, Navy and Notre Dame. Um, a lot of people not believing in Navy. A lot of people going with Notre Dame. That could just be the talent that that Notre Dame has. Sorry, that that could just be a little bit better. But what do you think, Coach?
But going, let's go back to the Navy Notre Dame game, our game of the week this week. If you're looking there at the picks, not very flattering for Coach Ninja. And as I mentioned before, I don't think that if he goes into South Bend and gets the win, it's necessarily an upset with the faith that I have in the program he's built. But that's a very I'm willing to bet that a few of those coaches who picked Notre Dame had a little hesitation in doing so, and that's a testament to Coach Ninja's ability as well. It's going to be a massive game. It's a non-conference game, but as we mentioned, it's a rivalry that goes back 90 years since 1927. And it's just it's we're really pleased that we've been able to have this game on the slate, to have it on the schedule. It's not often you get a marquee matchup like this during the course of the season. You might get a handful of them, and we've got one this week. Navy Notre Dame, going to be one heck of a game. We've got one heck of a league here. We've got a lot of great coaches here. It's a great experience, and I think I can speak for everyone in saying that this league, this football that we're playing, it's a little bit different. It's a little bit better. It's a little bit different, and I certainly am glad to have League 1 around, and all these coaches, all these fine programs, and great people involved in this whole affair. We've got plenty of season left. We're in year 15, season 15, and we're only in week 10. So plenty of exciting season left. We've got several weeks left in this year where a lot's going to be decided. Division races are going to be decided. Conference championship game appearances are going to be decided. Bowl berths are going to be decided. Coaches' future jobs are going to be decided. There's everything to play for everybody involved in this. Still yet to come in weeks 11 and onwards. We hope everybody will join us for next week's broadcast, where we'll be coming to you. Where's that going to be, Coach?
So next week game of the week is going to be between the Central Michigan Chippewas and the Buffalo Bulls in that huge MAC action game there. Both teams with an 8-0 record putting it on the line against one another. Quite possibly the biggest user matchup we have all season long. Um, and big time game for the MAC as well as this league. Super excited about that one. We will be in Buffalo, New York next week for that game. As our game of the week, again, is the Central Michigan Chippewas facing off against the Buffalo Bulls.
But that's going to be a cold one, and we expect, like we say, sunny skies, clear skies, sunny day for Notre Dame and Navy, and we're gonna go ahead and close up shop for this week. We hope you'll join us next week for week 11. This week, coming to you, it's been a pleasure here in South Bend, and we're going to leave you with an insight into what's in store tomorrow night at 8:30 on Twitch. Of course, the first game of that doubleheader will be the Syracuse Clemson game, But then right around 9:30 p.m. Eastern, and 8:30 Central Time, 9:30 p.m. Eastern on Twitch will be the big Navy Notre Dame game. So without any further ado, sayonara for this week. We hope you have an excellent week.
Yeah, have a good
Kick,
one.
yep, kick its ass, and we will catch you guys, all of our fans, next week for week 11. Since 1927, since the days of Newt Rockney and the Four Horsemen of the Apocalypse, Notre Dame and the United States Naval Academy have met on the gridiron to decide supremacy in college football. These two institutions, rooted in heritage, tradition, and academic excellence, have played for 9 decades. This week, in the 91st game, in a game that has featured United States presidents, Medal of Honor winners, and Heisman Trophy winners, the gap is bridged from the old to the new.
We'll come up with something wonderful.
That was Rick. And here's Perry. Malcolm Perry breaks the big one. The big play slot back for Navy. Malcolm Perry.
This week, this Friday, twitch.tv/sixgunninja. Navy versus Notre Dame live from South Bend, Indiana, 9:30 Eastern.